Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Storytime with Jester. Today, I'll be reading from my personal book, the Book of Prophecies. But it's going to be a little bit different today. Not only will I be reading from the chapter, but also there's going to be an interactive video in the midst. So sit back, enjoy, and here we go. It's Chapter 13, An Unlikely Trio. The Shady Dragon Inn was bustling with patrons when Andor entered and made his way to the trestle. The heat of the high summer day had taken its toll on him, and he was ready to quench his thirst with some of Oswald's finest. As he was about to hail his busy friend, Hawkeye appeared beside him and beat him to it. "Oswald, another round for me and my friends," he said. Then, noticing Andor, "And one for Andor here as well." Oswald, visibly frustrated, said, "You do have a wench serving you. Why must you bother me?" "Aye, we do, and a cute lass she is," Hawkeye replied as he gave Andor a wink and sly grin. "But our thirst is mightier than our patience." Oswald returned with 7 mugs of ale, placing one in front of Andor and the other 6 in front of Hawkeye. "Here's 2 for each of you. Now be gone." Hawkeye grabbed up the brew and made his way over to the table where Xavier and Devon were. "That be an unlikely trio," Oswald said, nodding in their direction. "Aye, they are indeed," Andor agreed. Oswald returned to his duties, leaving his friend with the ale. After a couple of hours, and many an ale, the patrons dwindled to just a few. It was then that Oswald poured himself an ale and joined his friend at the trestle. "I know none of ye have spoken much of your time away from us this past season," Oswald said, "and I've seen the scars on the wrists of the lot of ye. I was hoping you'd shed some light on what happened, if you're able." With the mention of the scars, Andor grasped one of his wrists and stroked it as if remembering something painful. "You know this past spring when we went to the coast to celebrate the feast of St. John?" Andor asked. Oswald nodded in remembrance, so Andor continued. "Shortly after the feast was over, the manor we were staying at was attacked by pirates. In our effort to track them down, we were captured. I was knocked unconscious, and when I awoke, I was aboard a slave ship, shackled at the wrists and ankles. All of my equipment and possessions had been stripped, and I was thrown in the hold with the rest of the slaves and forced to row. For 2 months we were aboard that cursed ship. May a cudgel strike swiftly on the head of the captain and crew. One day when the ship was offloading cargo, we managed to escape. Within a couple of days, we found shelter. But having been stripped of everything we owned when we were captured, we had to obtain jobs just to survive. The city we found ourselves in was a breeding ground for thugs, cutthroats, and other miscreants, and the like, who would just as soon kill us as talk to us. Most of us found work chopping wood, digging graves, cleaning stables, and the like. Joven was able to find a job with a teamster, and Hawkeye, well, Hawkeye was Hawkeye." The streets of Hedby were a filthy and disgusting crowded place, common in humanoid-ruled towns. Much trade passed through here, being loaded and unloaded on the many ships that made Hedby one of their ports of call. Having come from the hold of Marladron, Xavier was used to seeing slaves being sold in the blocks in open markets. But having just narrowly escaped such a fate himself, in the time spent rowing on the slave ship, he saw this affair in a much different light. To everyone's surprise, when looking for jobs, Xavier chose the occupation of gravedigger. It hadn't appeared that he had ever done any menial labor in his entire life, and to look at his hands, that was a fair assumption. Yet there he was, laboring in the heat of the day, shovel in hand, digging the grave of some poor sot who either lost his life in some act of violence, or from the beating or lashing he suffered at the hands of his taskmaster. It was the latter in which, while their bodies were being deposited in the hole he just created, he lingered for a while before proceeding to the next. Hawkeye had found a discarded jester's outfit in a pile of clothes that accumulated from that of the deceased. After trying it on for size, he found that it fit rather well. He then rummaged through the wood remnants of old coffins until he found a couple of sticks roughly 3 feet in length. One he carved into a makeshift sword. The other he decorated with baubles he found on the street and topped it off with a ball of golden cloth. He then found a mishmash of old colorful rags. He convinced Kelwyn to don them and told him of his plan. The two of them hung out near the tavern district and awaited the wenches. Devon, for lack of finding suitable labor, dressed in rags and sat against a nearby building begging for alms, everyone thinking him to be a blind beggar. As the wenches walked by on their way to and from the taverns and inns, Hawkeye sprang into action.
Well, tell me, my lady, are you a damsel in distress?
Well, you're here. I'm definitely in distress.
Well, good. Come right here. Stand right here. And hold this. It's my wand. Me lady, an evil dragon. Don't worry, I'll save you. My lady, the dragon is slain. You are saved. So tell me, my lady, are you a damsel in distress?
Well, I don't think I am. Depends on who you are.
What would you like to be?
Maybe.
Well, good. Stand right over here.
What's in it for me?
Well, you'll find out. You get to hold my wand.
Oh.
Oh, my lady! An evil dragon! Don't worry, I'll save you. The dragon is slain. You are safe, my lady.
You're my hero.
Oh, thank you very much.
By this time a crowd would have gathered to witness the spectacle, and when it was over, Kelwyn, still lying on the ground, would produce a cup for coins to be dropped in. Hawkeye would likewise produce a cup in one hand, and with the other slipped around the waist of the wench, try to procure a place to stay for the night. Needless to say, the duo of Hawkeye and Kelwyn produced more coinage than did the poor blind beggar. So how long did you have to live in this manner? Oswald asked. Well, like I said, Andor replied, we had no armor or weapons, or anything really. A few days after escaping the slave ship, a mysterious bundle appeared in my room. It contained some of our rather personal but mundane items that had been taken from us. Then one night our luck turned for the better. We had all gathered in a tavern to discuss our plans moving forward, and to find out if anyone had learned anything about the slavers, when we noticed a very rowdy and very drunk group of cutthroats boasting about their most recent success in murder and thievery. We waited for them outside and ambushed them in the alley. They won't be murdering anyone anymore. We relieved them of all their equipment and were now sufficiently supplied to pursue what we had learned about the slavers. We tracked them to their hideout in a dormant volcano located in the Sutter Butts at the southern tip of the eastern coast. I don't know if it was our inexperience or the gods punishing us for what we did to that gang of cutthroats, but we found ourselves captured once again and held prisoners in the slavers' dungeons beneath the volcano. We managed to escape, but as we reached the surface, the extinct volcano erupted. Just prior to that, an earthquake hit the area, destroying much. Everyone was fleeing to the docks in an effort to gain passage out of sure death. The group was half naked, dressed only in loincloths. They were poorly armed. Only 3 of them had weapons. Andor wielded a human thigh bone, and Eric and Marikai carried wooden sticks. Xavier had several scrolls containing spells at his disposal. The rest had only their fists, giving a new meaning to hand-to-hand combat. The docks area was a sea of mass confusion and violence as everyone attempted to escape the doomed crater city. Battles erupted at the few fishing boats tied up in an effort to gain passage to the far shore. The slavers were on a pier by themselves, loading their own ship with all they could salvage from the unexpected catastrophe. unmolested by the masses due solely to their reputation. As the group made their way to the pier, Xavier used his scrolls to bolster their abilities, including making himself and Kelvin vanish. Viewing a group of mercenaries gathered on the dock, Xavier unrolled one of the scrolls and prepared to read. Not wanting their adversaries to gain an advantage, they quickly advanced on the ship. Xavier began to read from the scroll, and as they were about 20 yards away from the mercenaries, Xavier spoke the last word of the spell. Immediately, 10 of the mercenaries fell to the ground, leaving only a surprised ogre standing there with his two-handed sword. The rest of the group charged, sprinting past the now visible mage. Eric reached the ogre first and swung his club at the ogre's skull. Marikai arrived seconds later and began assaulting the ogre's torso. Jovan grabbed a sword from beside one of the sleeping mercenaries and ran toward the ship. When he reached the edge of the dock, he leaped into the air and, like a spider, clung to the side of the ship. There he began climbing to the top. Kelvin, invisible, took a dagger from one of Xavier's victims and made his way to the gangplank. At the first sight of the party, one of the slavers aboard the ship, a brown-robed priest, called out a warning to the others and began casting a spell at Xavier. A huge half-orc dressed in leather armor shouted a battle cry, ran down the gangplank, and rushed the trio, fighting the ogre, a dagger in each hand. A beautiful female dark elf cast a spell at Andor and then began looking for her next target. A multicolored pattern, akin to the reflection of light from a prism, appeared in the air in front of Hawkeye and Devon. At the railing of the ship, a man in a purple-pointed wizard's hat and orange robes was waving a stick of incense in the air. Devon never saw the pattern of colors. Hawkeye, however, stood frozen, transfixed on the ever-moving colors in the air. As Devon was moving toward the sound of battle, he heard a splash in the water near the ship. He was apparently the only one in the group to notice. At the same time that Jovan was leaping to the side of the ship, a man in red pajamas leapt over him and onto the dock near Devon, armed with nothing but his bare hands. Devon heard the man's feet hit the dock, but was more intent on finding the source of the splash. The ogre, despite his size, was no match for the pair of fighters armed with clubs. As his body hit the pier with a loud thud, the half-orc let his daggers fly and drew his sword. The daggers found their mark in Eric and Marikai, but luckily for them, the half-orc's aim was slightly off due to his rage. Eric, with his newfound strength, defended the blows from the half-orc's sword and countered with his club to the head. Marikai, adept with daggers himself, dropped his club and simultaneously pulled the daggers from himself and Eric. With a quick lunge toward the half-orc, Marikai plunged both daggers into the dazed half-orc's carotids. Always mispronounce that word. The monk moved to attack Devon, who he assumed was an easy target for his martial arts. Unbeknownst to him, however, Devon had also been trained in a monastery. Devon's skills at empty-handed combat wasn't near as good as the monk's, so all he was able to do was fend off any blows designed to be instant kills. As a result, the monk was beating Devon to a bloody pulp. The illusionist at the railing, seeing the demise of the half-orc, broke concentration on the hypnotic spell and sent a wave of fear at the pair of fighters. Eric was the only one not affected as Marikai dropped his daggers and fled. The dark elf, with a wave of her hand, began levitating Eric off the pier. That is, until Kelvin's dagger penetrated her heart from behind. As Jovan was climbing over the railing of the ship, the priest shouted, "Dive!" at him. Unable to resist the priest's enchantment, Jovan obeyed, diving into the water below. Andor turned in the direction of the sound of Jovan's body hitting the water, but in doing so put his back to the wet thief that was sneaking up on him. The monk drop-kicked Devon's limp body into that of the dead ogre. As he draped himself over Devon, ready to inflict the coup de grace, Devon grabbed the two-handed sword that was the ogre's and impaled the surprised monk. As he had laid there awaiting the monk's approach, Devon's ears finally located the source of the splash. He quickly pivoted his body, pulled the sword out of the dead monk's gut, and hurled it at Andor. It flew by Andor and embedded itself into the thief's chest just as she was about to stab Andor in the back. She dropped her jeweled dagger as her body was propelled backwards by the force of Devon's throw. Realizing his life was in jeopardy, priest touched the ring on his finger and was about to intone the word that would spirit him safely away when he found himself suddenly paralyzed. Back on the pier, Xavier had just finished casting another spell from one of his scrolls, holding fast to the priest where he stood. Xavier had not been affected by the priest's attempt to silence him. The wizard turned to run, but Kelvin was upon him before he could get more than a few steps away. Jovan, no longer under the spell of the priest, climbed back up the ship and, seeing what he thought was an unsuspecting victim, cut the immobile priest down. After stripping the slavers of all their equipment and possessions, the bodies were dumped in the lake. The group loaded the ship with all the ex-slaves they had found and sailed to the far shore. And so ends Chapter 13, An Unlikely Trio. I hope you all enjoyed this rather different version of Storytime with Jester. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And as always, see you soon.